Okay. Yeah, thank you for having me here today. Thanks a lot to the Thunder core team, and apologies for my hair color. It's not changing on a daily basis, but believe me, it is changing one gray hair at a time. Basically, we talked already. What I wanted to say in the first 1 or 2 minutes of my presentation, we've already done it now with Debulo. At the very core, an editorial calendar or a story planning tool is very simple. It's about lists. As I said before, it gets a lot more complicated once you have a few customers, but at the very core, it's lists, and you can do. But what we've seen over the years is that even though it's a very simple tool, it can enable new or better editorial processes, not just, but especially when it's integrated with a tool with a CMS like Thunder. So just briefly about us, if we are from Hamburg, and if you've never heard of Hamburg, yes, this is our office. At least we are working on that. We are Hamburg-based, we are a team of 30, and we are servicing customers from the news industry, magazines, and corporate communications. So the typical customer would be Spiegel Online or Süddeutsche Zeitung or Los Angeles Times in the news industry, or in corporate communications, it's Zalando, Allianz, customers like these. That's what we do. But let's move away from us and talk about the actual topic. And it all started out with us integrating in a bidirectional way with WordPress. So we built a plugin there, and we found that more and more of our customers started using it. That was the intention. That's why we did it. But then along, there was all of a sudden there was Thunder, and we thought, wow, that's cool. WordPress not too bad, but let's have a look at Thunder too. And we like the fact that Thunder is not just, but quite heavily focused on the publishing industry, and that's that's primarily our focus. And now, by and large, most of our, even corporate communications departments and so on, they are all, in their sense, they're all a publisher. So for that reason, Thunder is very important for us, and we started dating Thunder. And it actually worked out, and we built a bidirectional integration with Thunder, and we just came out with it a few months ago. So let's talk about an editorial calendar and where the whole thing came from. In the good old days, this was basically your editorial calendar. It was a piece of paper or a book or something, like 10 years ago. Still, some editorial departments, some newsrooms work like that today, and that's our, at least it used to be our prime competitor. In other cases, it may have been an Excel file sheet or Google Doc, but traditionally, this has been our primary competitor. So in the good old days, basically what you had was one newsroom working on one print product. And that's simple. That's something you can handle, in some cases even with rotten planning, no planning, or just with planning in a notebook. And then along came this internet, and all of a sudden you had two things to plan for. At least you should have planned for it, and you should have managed these two. Most didn't initially, but at least the challenge is there. But you don't necessarily need a big tool for that, or a very elaborated tool for that. A simple one would do. But then other things started to happen. And that is, in a lot of publishing houses, you didn't just have one printed product and one website or so, but for different reasons, sometimes simply for cost-cutting reasons, all of a sudden one newsroom had to take care of multiple brands, multiple titles, both in print, and as well as online, and then there may be newsletters, and of course there's Facebook and Twitter and all these other kind of platforms that you need to service. And you're already getting the feeling that a paper notebook isn't really that suited for that. And then in certain cases, it becomes even more complicated because on the one hand, within a publisher, there might be different teams working on different brands and titles across print and digital. And in some specific cases, it's even collaboration across or in between publishers, which makes coordination even more complicated. Collaboration starts right there. So whatever your editorial process is, be it in a corporate communications department or in a newsroom or in a magazine editorial department, collaboration starts right there at the very, very beginning in the planning phase. It doesn't start at the back, it starts right there. So if you want to collaborate, or if you are being asked to collaborate, you need to start right there. Do we move on? The other thing that makes life for somebody who's coordinating in a newsroom more difficult is, you have more and more stories typically. Over the last 10 to 20 years, you've seen typically the number of stories going up. You have a lot more formats. In the good old print days, you would have text, photo, and maybe infographics. And now you have all kinds of other photos. You have polls, you have videos, you have audio, all kinds of formats. And of course, in most cases, speed has increased. Due to digital. Typically, for the typical editorial department, speed is significantly higher than some 10 years ago. And in total, that all adds up to increased complexity. Plus, one more thing, in many newsrooms, you used to work basically during the day. You came in at 9 and you left around 6 or something, or in a newspaper newsroom, you would come in at 10 or 11 and you'd work until 7 or so, and everybody's in the newsroom at the same time. With digital news, you had to start a lot earlier, at around 6 in the morning, and you have to be in the news. Somebody needs to be in the newsroom until, say, 10 in the evening, midnight, or whatsoever. So typically, there are multiple shifts during the day, and you cannot always just call yourself, talk to each other, and communicate what the story plan is for the day. But instead, you need to have some kind of technological basis, some kind of editorial calendar, which everybody can access all the time and see what's going on. And now, and at the moment, we are seeing yet another very significant shift that has implications for newsroom coordination and story planning. And that is, over the last, up until a few years ago, editorial strategies were largely focused on reach. You try to get a lot of reach, a lot of Facebook likes, something, get your content in touch with a lot of users, a lot of readers out there. And now the whole world, or a lot of newsrooms and a lot of publishers are shifting their strategy to moving away from a strong focus on reach towards monetization. And what they are finding out as part of that shift is that it's often very different content that's monetizable, compared to the one that gets you a lot of reach. So some kind of piece of news about Justin Bieber may get you a lot of likes, but it's typically not the kind of content that converts. And that's a very different thing. And now publishers are starting to find out what kind of content converts, and which in turn means they need to plan for it. You don't just come up with this kind of content in a few minutes. You need to plan for it. You need to see, okay, do we have the right content for today, for this week, for the next week? And that's a significant shift where also we, as a software provider, need to provide the tools for it to support this simply. And here, very importantly, this is translated from German. There's a German word called Aktualität, which is really difficult to translate into English. I tried to do it with breaking news. It could also be timeliness. They have an internal saying: quality comes from planning, and breaking news comes by itself. And that's something they've been knowing it for a long time. In a way, it's surprising, because when you think about a wire agency, typically you're thinking about these fast news. Something happens in Japan, and within minutes you know about it. But this is an internal saying at the DPA about how important planning is. And we see it with one of our customers. They've actually just told me about it a few days ago, so I don't have any reliable data there, and we want to do a case study about it, but we don't have it yet. Now, Mindpost is a regional publisher in Germany. They've been a long-time customer for us for about 8 years or so, and they've been using our tool for quite heavily. But then about 1 or 2 years ago, they started a project, maybe a rather messy project, of basically thinking about just about everything they've been doing in the newsroom and thinking about how they want to proceed and how they want to work in the future. And part of that project was that they reviewed their planning processes, and they came up with a lot more with planning processes which are way more comprehensive, way more structured than they used to be. They also reviewed Desnet. Do we want to continue working with Desnet? And in the end, we came out winning. And then they just told me that a few days ago that they changed, they then went into implementing these new comprehensive planning processes. And at that point in time, they didn't change anything else, and their reach on the website went up by 20 to 25%, just because of planning. You will find similar statements, for instance, from the CEO of the Telegraph Media Group in London. He's saying the same thing. So basically, maybe I should have called the entire presentation not how a simple editorial calendar enables new editorial workflows, but actually how it enables success. So thinking about it, when it comes to this old paper calendar, this paper editorial calendar, the one and only thing you can do with it is you just shred it. That's just about the best thing to do. As a matter of fact, when we came out with DeskNet some 11 years ago, in February 2007, and our pilot customer, Frankfurter Rundschau, introduced it, the newsroom assistants, on the very first day of DeskNet ever being used in a newsroom, they took their actual book with all the events and appointments in Frankfurt and just dumped it. That was quite courageous. I mean, DeskNet, we had developed it for 3 months, and they thought it was good enough for day-to-day business, but apparently it worked. So, what are the kind of processes that we see there? First of all, of course, this is not about DeskNet. Of course, we'd like everybody to use our tool, but you can use other tools. Quite a few publishers have custom tools. In a lot of cases, the editorial systems providers have certain modules, and to a certain degree, you can do it with standard tools like Asana or Trello or similar tools. They have their limits, but to a certain degree, you can do it with those tools as well. What kind of processes do we see? And we move from simple to a bit more complex. One thing that we see today is that, for instance, the Los Angeles Times does it, or 20 Minutes, 20 Minutes in Paris does it, as in the digital team is in the breaking news business. Not everybody who's in digital is in breaking news business, but their teams are. So they don't really need DeskNet. They don't need an editorial calendar for planning. But what happens is that all of the stories they publish on their website, be it small stories, be it big stories, they are all transferred to the editorial calendar, which then enables the print team to see, okay, what's been going on and what's being planned, because then in those cases, the print team sees what's going on and takes the content that it considers good enough for print and builds a printed newspaper or weekly newspaper out of it. So that's a very, very simple process here. The interesting thing is that traditionally, what we've been seeing over the last 10 years, and still with a lot of our customers, is it's been the other way around. Initially, the digital teams were most happy about these planning tools because that way, once the print team, in those days, you still had these separate, you had print and online. It's still the case for many today. Several years ago, it was the de facto norm for almost everybody. And so in those cases, print would start working with the editorial calendar, would start planning, and that all of a sudden created transparency for the digital team. All of a sudden, for the very first time, they would see what the big newsroom, the print newsroom, is actually working on, and that way they could adapt and see, okay, tomorrow they're going to go there, we'll send somebody with a video camera, and that helped them a lot. So here we are seeing basically a flip of traditionally being first print newsroom working with an editorial calendar and digital benefiting from it, and we've been seeing the flip here. One more workflow that we see here is that the editorial team is then using an editorial calendar, and that enables the ad teams to see what's coming up next week, but more importantly, what's coming up next month or in the next quarter, so that we can start selling. And we know from our customer T-Online here in Berlin that also for the SEO teams, it's important to know what are the big stories coming up in a few months. Because they say, our SEO teams, we need to start preparing for it month and month in advance. So what kind of workflows are there once you integrate it with a tool like Drupal? The typical one and very simple one is actually that you do plan a story. This is a story we want to publish tomorrow or next week, and that would automatically create an entry in Drupal. We send over the data, and then the changes that are being made are synced back and forth between these two systems. So for instance, if you say we want to publish it tomorrow at 12, and then somebody goes into Drupal and says, no, I'm not going to be done with tomorrow at 12, we need to publish it at 4 p.m., then this kind of change is being synced back and forth, and here you have one common database across editorial calendar and Drupal. And the other way around is that you just go ahead and publish something, whatever happens. Trump is tweeting something. Of course, that's not a story that you plan. You see what he tweets, you write about it. You don't really care about your story planning. But the important thing here is once it's integrated, that this kind of data is automatically synced back to your editorial calendar. And that then turns your simple editorial calendar all of a sudden into a kind of a dashboard. Remember, a few minutes ago I started talking an editorial calendar is actually a very simple list, and yes, at the very core it is. But once you've integrated it in a bidirectional way with a CMS, you have a complete overview, and even more so, once you've integrated it with multiple CMSs. So whatever has been published or whatever is scheduled to be published, you have your simple editorial calendar is turning into an editorial dashboard. And provides the necessary information for whoever is actually managing the story flow in the editorial department or in the newsroom. That even works. I've tried to draw it. I didn't come up with a good idea. That nobody has even done that, at least not nobody from our customers. I'd love them to do it, but so far nobody has. But this is an idea where we say, this would even work if specific editorial teams would not work with the editorial calendar. So let's assume the teams working for the second Drupal website here and for the teams working with the other CMS, they're using DeskNet, but two teams, number 1 and number 3, they're actually not working with this editorial calendar. Still, you could integrate it with your editorial calendar, and the data, the stories would flow back into the editorial calendar, and still, even though they are not working with it, you would have a comprehensive overview of what's going on across your brands. And that's the basis then for sharing content. Because you see, okay, they've just published that, or they've planned to publish that. Now let's use that across our network on a totally different website. And that's enabled or that's supported by a solution like this one. And that, even depending on what your editorial calendar is capable of technically, that would even work across publishers. Or that can work across publishers if your editorial calendar is set up that way. For those of you who are not familiar with Europe, I've drawn a nice little map for you. You're from the German-speaking region, so this is Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And we have cases here where, for instance, Süddeutsche Zeitung and Tagesanzeiger, those are both national broadsheet quality newspapers. They are sharing content across, and they are sharing content lists, story lists they are sharing across publisher boundaries. They don't belong to each other. They are totally different, totally separate companies, and yet they are sharing their story lists on a constant basis. Of course, not all of the, Süddeutsche Zeitung is not sharing everything with Tagesanzeiger and vice versa. They are just sharing parts of it. But it's one list, one partial list that they're looking at, and that really supports their content sharing agreements. And we have another one, for instance, actually now they all belong together, but still they're on different systems. They don't have a unified system landscape, and it's a kind of a threesome. They're sharing content, they're sharing the story lists across 3 distinct newsrooms. And all of that is possible and enables collaboration with this one very simple story list. And the one big thing that is now happening, and now I'm coming back to actually monetizing stories, and that's something where we also need to become better with DeskNet, and we are, and that's a thing for us in 2019, is that the whole industry needs to move away from planning content. Some in the industry are not even yet planning content, or not in a good way. But those who are more advanced in this area, they need to move away from planning content simply and move towards planning the right content. Here we are talking about, what kind of content do we need? We've seen the presentation from Service Plan some 45 minutes ago. Basically, that's what needs to happen more often in the publishing industry, and that needs to be supported by story lists as a moving away from, okay, this is the kind of content we have, towards, okay, we have this, 3 category A stories, whatever category A is, and we have 5 category B stories and 10 category C stories. That is a major shift that is now happening in the area of newsroom management and story planning. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank God that Mr. Burda is not here today personally, because I would have to tell him, sorry, Hubert, Matthias convinced me I'm changing my Playboy calendar to the DeskNet calendar. But are there any questions to Matthias except from, are you really Banksy? No question?
No questions?
Well done.
Thank you very much again.
Okay, Matthias, thank you very much.